After spending a trilogy's worth of video games on the Super Nintendo and being great at it for the most part, the Mega Man X series makes a proper debut over to the 32-bit age with Mega Man X4, released in 1997 for Sony PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and PC CD-ROM. The PlayStation version is what we're looking at here today, since that's the only version I've got, although I may cheat and use the collection version at certain times, which shouldn't be too much of a deviation since they mostly play the same way. Anyways, Mega Man X4 is the first game in the series where players could choose to play as either X or Zero. Yeah, technically Zero was playable in X3, even though he was just a more souped up X. But it's in X4 where Zero was truly born and made distinct from X, with a focus on close quarters combat thanks to his Z-Saber Beam Saber thing. This ostensibly gave the player two distinct ways to play the game, with X providing the more traditional Mega Man experience where you fought and defeated Mavericks to gain their weapons, most of which were shit with maybe one or two exceptions, and that's as far as I'll go, as well as searching for armor parts to improve your abilities. While Zero was the more challenging melee fighter who would learn new attacks and abilities executed by command. Given the choice, I'd stick with X since I prefer a more distanced attack, but Zero's also pretty fun to play with, even more so once you start learning moves and you have all these arsenal of attacks to play with. In any case, X4 takes a bit of a step back from the previous two games in the series as far as extra stuff for you to collect. There are no Zero pieces to uncover, there are no hyper chips or multiple ride armor pickups for you to pick up, and no deviating from the beaten path to fight off a boss with a specific sub-weapon in order to kill them and get some sort of different ending. It's just straightforward running, jumping, shooting, dashing, wall climbing through stages, while looking to find alternate routes that will lead you to life-extending heart containers, energy sub-tanks of which include 2 life tanks and a weapons tank, and of course another set of armor pieces for X, which grants him the usual air dash as well as a temporary hovering ability that I found pretty easy to activate by accident at times, 2 possible buster upgrades to choose from, one allowing you to stock up to 4 charge shots in reserve, and another giving you a devastating plasma shot that leaves behind damaging balls of plasma on enemies, but both sets let you charge your weapons, and a Nova Strike attack to go along with increased defensive attributes. And the head part gives you infinite ammo on the regular weapons shots. Finally, some good fucking head part. If you can get it, because the way there is just... yeah, we'll get to that. About halfway through your Maverick hunting romping things, you'll face off against Colonel Guile of the Repliforce, the villains for today's game, in a duel, and you'll have to beat him before moving on to your Maverick hunting ways. So, whatever, right? It's your midway boss, so to speak, and once you figure out the gimmick, it's like, man, why are you wasting my time? I hope we put up a better fight in round 2. Until then, go home and be a family Reploid or something, I don't know, nobody's gonna get that. Mega Man X4 is not only where you have a choice in playable characters, but this is where they started getting experimental in their level design now that they have all this processing power and do more than just fill straightforward levels up with enemies and 3/4 of the bunch have some sort of projectile weapon like the previous game. Now, this being released around the same time as Mega Man 8, X4 also splits its levels into 2 segments, which I never really cared for as a concept, but considering you can continue from the beginning of the second segment after a game over, it does have its benefits. Also, whenever you lose a life or begin a new act, all your weapons are restored to full capacity, which makes life a little easier and makes the weapons tank a little more useless, but I digress. So there's a level where you're on a speeder bike for the majority of it, and it feels like a low-rent turbo tunnel thing. There's a level where you're climbing a staircase, there's a level where you're playing mini-stages, and you're trying to get an S ranking to get a collectible upgrade. With the last stage being a pain in the ass, I'm not gonna lie. There's a level where you're hopping trains, a level where you're riding an elevator, because we need another one of those. A level where you're dodging fireballs. There's a couple ride armor segments that feel more like ride armor segments from the first 2 games, and not throwaway stuff like in X3. Anyways, the levels are a mixed bag. The ones that focus on straight up platforming and blasting are the most fun ones. The volcano level, the forest level, and the armada levels, for example. While the ones that are focused on gimmicks tend to be less fun. Stuff like Turbo Tunnel Stingray or Cyber Peacock Lemon Racing are no buys for me. Which means I'm never getting that head part, am I? And well, I guess it's back to the Ultimate Armor for me. Ultimate Armor. You put in a cheat code on the character select screen with You pick X, you find a capsule, you'll get this dark colored armor that's pretty much the same as your full armor, except now you have infinite Nova Strikes, which ends up being pretty easy to spam and abuse. Zero also has a hidden thing that makes his suit black and not much else, but that's okay because the story is all about him anyway, so... Control's fine. It's not quite as polished or as solid as the previous games, but it's perfectly functional and responsive for the most part. It'll get the job done. I find the hover ability a little easy to pull off at inconvenient times, but at the very least, you know it is easy to pull off, and pulling off Zero's various moves when you've earned them is pretty solid stuff as well. The speeder ain't too bad for the one stage you play, but it has its quirks you need to adjust to, and once you do, it's only one stage. And since we have memory cards, Mega Man X4 saves your progress via these memory card saves, so no more passwords to skip stuff, which is unfortunate, because... oh. So we need to talk about the graphics of Mega Man X4, since this is the graphical style that's going to exist for the rest of the series' stay here on PlayStation 1, with one exception actually. This game looks the prettiest and is quite possibly one of the best looking 2D Mega Man games in the X series, if not the whole franchise even. Oh, that last part might be a bit of a stretch, but certainly the best looking game in the X series. X4 took what the 16-bit games did and overhauled everything. Everything is more vibrant, more detailed, dashing leaves behind a trail of shadows and stuff. The animation's more fluid, especially among the heroes. There's bigger bosses and bots. Now with pre-fight dialogue for added layers, everything plays out at a consistent pace. There's no slowdown or anything of the sort. A lot of the levels look stunningly good, and while there's some pre-rendered stuff in there that looks kinda iffy, it's nowhere as bad as it would get down the road. Soak in all the wonderful scenery here, folks, because it all goes downhill from here. And so, of course, we need to talk about the video, because that's a thing. The animation's fine, the video quality's okay, the voice acting not so much. The plot as a whole is nonsensical. They tried to make Zero's story more personal with Iris and Colonel Guile and his relationship with those people, while X is just business as usual, and given the choice, I'm going the latter route because the more I attempt to dwell into this narrative, the more of a headache I get. People claim at some point the X narrative goes off the rails, but X4 clearly established there were no rails to begin with, the wily tease notwithstanding. Okay, look, this whole thing with Repliforce was driven by ego, and if cooler heads had prevailed, if Colonel Guile used his brain and gave Hunter HQ the time of day, chances are we wouldn't have had a conflict, nor an uprising, nor quite frankly, a game for that matter. But then again, it couldn't have been that difficult to find some other reason to fight Sigma again, and ugh, god. Getting a headache again. Okay, I'm gonna stop with the story now. Let's talk about something that doesn't give me a headache, and that's the soundtrack, for the most part. The last video, I said the soundtrack for the PlayStation port of X3 sounded like lounge music. And to its credit, X4 is a whole PlayStation experience that doesn't have a prior soundtrack to remix or butcher. Also to its credit is that the music sounds less loungy and more varied, with different flavors and tones to fit the stage playing out. Web Spider has a cool jungle theme, Storm Owl has a good medley to it to go along with the Armada. Split Mushroom's another quality tense theme to go with the the mysterious magical thing or whatever it is that stage is. But there are some duds. The boss theme is the drizzling shits. A couple of the final themes aren't much better. Still, more good songs than bad, so that counts for something. Also, sound effects are a step above the previous game in either SNES or PlayStation flavors. The little vocal bits, as brief as they are, not as much. Overall, Mega Man X4 is perhaps the best game in the PlayStation run of Mega Man X games. Some would argue it's the best game in the entire X series, but I wouldn't go that far. It's got a couple quibbles that keeps it from being truly top tier, but for the most part, X4 maintains the formula of the previous games and plays it safe by keeping it simple while introducing this whole other style of play with Zero that works rather well once you get the hang of it. For the most part, it's a thoroughly enjoyable Mega Man adventure and a pretty solid platformer all around. And much like Mega Man X on the SNES side, Mega Man X4 is pretty much the high point in the PlayStation era before everything goes tumbling to the ground. And unlike with X2 and X3, the fall from here would be pretty nasty. But that's another story for another time.